Welcome. Another sunny day. I think it's going to be a warmer day than yesterday. This is Friday, bank holiday, and so good to see so many people with us today. Really appreciate the time that you're taking to actually join us every morning. Look forward to the session today. Today's session is with Nikki Goodman, and Nicola Hickton will be supporting her during the Q&A session. I don't think it'd be right not to mention it's the 75th anniversary of VE Day. And that's why it feels so strange to have a bank holiday on a Friday. I think it was important that today was a bank holiday. And I think it was equally important that we continued to have our sessions where we can. It was marking the end of a very dark period in our country's history and actually in our world's history. And I think taking a moment just to celebrate that and thinking ahead, thinking at some point in the future, and it will come, we will be celebrating coming out of our current situation and returning to some kind of normality. So hold tight, guys, stay positive and stay safe while we work our way towards that point in our current situation. We've got so many sessions coming up. We've still got probably in excess of 40 sessions that are still to come between now and July in whatever format we end up doing, depending on what happens on Sunday. So from that point of view, there'll be a lot to dig into and there'll be something for everybody. Make sure you do follow and subscribe. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump straight into the video. Thank you very much to Nikki and Nicola for putting this together for us, and enjoy.
Good morning and a warm welcome to today's CPD session on preparing for a deep dive in English. I'm Nikki Goodman and work as an English SLE for the Chiltern Learning Trust. It's been an honour to be asked to deliver one of these sessions and so great to see many of you signing up for them. I know the ones I've attended so far have really helped me to reflect on certain aspects of leadership, and I hope today's session aids you in reflecting on your department and curriculum ahead of next year in English. In a time where we feel our curriculums have paused and feel there's so much still to cover or gaps to overcome with our students, it's worth remembering the following 2 points that have resonated with me from previous CPD sessions. 2 weeks ago, Dame Alison Peacock really stressed the idea that these gaps that we've now got due to the current situation should not now be trying to be frantically crammed into the first few weeks back in September. That would be overwhelming for both pupils and staff alike. It's about pace and embedding these core skills and gaps into next year, into that next key stage, into that next year from 7 to 8 as part of the transition and beyond. Also, my colleague in the Trust, Nadine Cotton, last week talked about the ethos of a deep dive and really stressed that a deep dive should be at the core of your daily practice as a team. It's not just about these sessions creating a tick box of ways to then, for when being quality assured, either by leadership in your school or by outside visitors such as Ofsted, that you're just ticking boxes. It's that idea that this is now a practice that should be embedded and interwoven day to day and every term. So what I want us to start first of all is just a quick reminder of what a deep dive consists of. And it starts with these 3 I's. Intent at leadership level, where we think about our vision of English, where we see it, mapping out how we know that our students can know more, remember more and do more across the year or term or unit of work and across the key stage and across their life at school as well in education. It then moves on to implementation, what this looks like in action. So when we go into those lessons, when we look at through books, what does this look like in actual action? And then the 3rd I is the impact, the result of putting certain strategies or certain topics or text coverage in place in our subject. So what we have very evidently is this sense of triangulation. It doesn't just stop at impact. The impact is measured, it's reviewed, it's then put back into the intent to work out how we can deliver the best curriculum and provision we can in English for our students across the abilities. So what we need to consider as well is why English would be involved in a deep dive. So obviously the main one would be Ofsted. However, some of our schools might include Mocksteds, where other heads or teaching and learning for other schools come in and help prepare a school for an Ofsted with a Mocksted. It might be the fact that it's part now of the school's team review process and a whole school approach where deep dives are used now as part of performance management and where then there's a good preparation or as part of challenge partners. So it's this idea that deep dive is now principle, and this idea of triangulation to interrogate and quality assure that what that department is saying is actually happening and then having an impact. So when we're looking at a deep dive, the key word I want us to look at when looking at this description of a deep dive taken from the Ofsted framework is this word interrogate. So obviously as English linguists, we're looking at the language that Ofsted are using and thinking, well, what does that actually mean? So it's ensuring that in a short space of time, they're gaining and collating as much evidence as possible to be able to make a fair and accurate judgment of what they are seeing, what is evident, and what the pupils are experiencing in terms of quality of education in our subject. When I was putting this together, this CPD session, I've not done this solely alone. I think what's great about being part of a trust, in particular the Chiltern Learning Trust, is that sense of collaboration. And although I'm the speaker today, I want to actually at this point just say thank you very much to schools and other heads of department that helped collaborate and put this together in terms of recent experience of being through on Ofsted themselves, which I will come on to. But when speaking to two heads of English who have just gone through the Ofsted process in our trust, they said that during the team leader question, as both at both schools, the deep dive was actually with English. The team leaders, excuse me, the team leaders did feel a little bit overwhelmed and a bit of a sense of frustration leaving the Ofsted meeting that they had first thing in the morning with those Ofsted inspectors, due to the fact that they felt that they were interrogated. They felt that questions led to questions led to questions, and sometimes they had to repeat themselves or go back and clarify themselves to really make sure that those Ofsted inspectors were truly understanding what was at the root and the core values and vision of their departments. When looking at the new framework, it's worth in particular rag-rating not only the national curriculum to your current and proposed content and provision, as suggested by Nadine, but also to evaluate these 4 areas. The first is knowledge and skills, and these 2 questions are a good starting point. For example, where is language analysis included in Year 7 but then built and developed upon in Years 10 and 11? Do language methods explicitly taught not only get recapped but also developed, such as similes and metaphors in isolation with shorter pieces of text, then becoming part of a pattern across a whole text, such as a motif or symbol? When teaching 2 GCSEs literature and language at Key Stage 4, however you approach that in your setting and context, where can literature texts have a language crossover, such as part of the text being looked at for close analysis? The knowledge and skills, however, is not just student-centred, but also about staff and their subject pedagogy and areas of specialism. Do you, as an English team or leader, do regular audits of your team and the areas that they feel less confident in teaching or developing with their classes? Where then do you include time to address these gaps and have those discussions and supportive team meetings where you share good practice of this? Not just in one go in a PDD or CPD day, but also where it's incremental gains, as Will Smith talked about last week. Curriculum flexibility and how these questions show it is not fixed, but has the ability to change based on the cohort and needs of the pupils that we teach and that we have come into our schools. It might be for English, the national curriculum and GCSE specs encompass a lot of text we have taught for a number of years, but it is the ability to look at how we adapt our approach to teaching skills with the text to address gaps and misconceptions, such as looking at maybe a real focus in modern society now is the mental health and well-being of our society and individuals. Maybe look at, for example, Macbeth and how his mental state parallels to his physical deterioration. A key focus after one glance is the provision in place for SEND and disadvantaged pupils. I'd like to stress at this point that SEND is not solely less able, but also more able and how they are stretched and challenged. These questions, I think, are really clear in ensuring their needs are considered in English, but not seen as a limitation. A key question in English that often comes up is text choices, in particular maybe the 19th century text choice for literature. Rather than maybe looking at the text, it could be useful to review then how you would scaffold and aim up, so what you'd support you'd put in place to ensure that those barriers are overcome. For example, if teaching Jekyll and Hyde, looking at the violence of Hyde as a character and how that makes him an outsider. Some of these pupils might feel themselves an outsider due to their barrier or due to their need, so can empathise with Hyde and how he might be feeling. Also look at the provision of your less able and your more able in terms of SEND and disadvantage. Which classes are they put into if you set, and how maybe they could be surrounded with discussion and immersed in Tier 3 vocabulary, as talked about by LDeduchat in Closing the Gap. Lastly, the fourth key area is the concept of cultural capital and how we as an English department plan and embed skills and text to prepare and equip students to be successful in life. This might be from spoken forms such as constructing opinions and ideas to having to justify and argue their value in debates, to also linking maybe between fiction and reality, looking at not just at the setting of text from the Moores and the Bronte sisters' works and London and Dickens, but also maybe the roles and careers of the fictional characters themselves. For example, the doctors and lawyers in Jekyll and Hyde, and maybe students researching the reality of those roles and their wages, hours, and the qualifications in order to do that job successfully. So when we're thinking about the deep dive, we can see that there's a definite sequence to this that links to the intent, implementation, and impact. So the top one is evaluation of senior leaders' intent, and the curriculum is long and medium term thinking and planning of this. So these two we could see with the intent, and this is the first thing we're going to focus on. We're then going to look at that idea of the sample of lessons and work scrutiny and discussion with teachers. That becomes the implementation section. And then lastly, look at a discussion with a group of pupils from the lessons observed or about to be observed. And from that discussion is then the impact, how they can measure what progress those pupils are making in your subject area. So when we think about intent, these are questions that might be posed to you as a head of department or team leader. So when looking at these questions, these are things that can be really useful to reflect upon when thinking about your curriculum at present. So what is needed to succeed in the following key stage? So if you're looking at planning your key stage 3, what have they been doing and focusing on in key stage 2 that can really build and plan into your key stage 3, in particular your year 7 transition period? How do you ensure that there's a breadth and coherence for them to be successful at GCSE and A level, but without being driven by it? So this idea that Key Stage 4 should not be geared solely towards the exam process at the end. There should also be that sense that you're widening and broadening the horizons of your pupils in your classroom. What is on offer to whom and when? Is there sequencing and revisiting? Do you return too little or too often? So once again, it's working out what texts are you offering and to which ability groups. There is nothing wrong with the fact that certain groups might do different texts, as it might appeal to them in terms of maybe a particular gender or age, or also their ability. When is it offered? So it could also be when you're looking at curriculum map, have you got the sequence in the right way? Do you feel that actually your curriculum plan builds on each other and actually adds for that sequence and recalling and retrieval of key information and ideas? This idea that students to develop knowledge, their knowledge and understanding of the text that they are reading, their knowledge and understanding of the wider world and thematic ideas from those texts, and also their knowledge of English as an active literacy skill. When a student's asked to apply the components of subject knowledge to composite tasks, so that idea of that knowledge, when are they actually going to apply that knowledge? So that idea that know more, but then do more with it. What is the intent of the extracurricular offer? So if you do have extracurricular, whether it's a lunchtime or after school club, or the fact that you do get in outside speakers, what is the intent of that particular person or that particular club being run? How does it link to the students and their broadening and enriching of English as a language and as a subject? Who devised your curriculum and what was the driving force behind those decisions? So looking at the fact that this will be done in links with the school improvement plan with your senior leaders in your school. What's the driving force behind certain decisions? Is it pupil-centred and focused? Is it designed to give them their best possible ability and being able to leave school with not just a GCSE grade, but also a greater sense of English in the world around them? And also the idea that your curriculum needs to be challenging and ambitious for all. So thinking about every step of your plan, is there room here and scope for challenge and ambition and rigour with the text that you are teaching, with the skills that you are aspiring and aiming for your students to develop and use for full effect and impact? So those were some possible questions. What I'm now going to share with you is the reality. So every time that I've looked at the possibles, then comes the reality of what actually happened. And this has been shared with me by a head of department at Chiltern High School for Boys who were Ofsteded this year. This was their first inspection in 12 years, and they received an outstanding. So the phone call day, the deep dive areas were established, and English was named as one of them. So on the first day of the inspection, the head of department met with an Ofsted inspector. It was scheduled for 8 o'clock, but it realistically started at 8:15 once the inspector had set up and that they had then got themselves in a position to start their discussion. And it lasted for 35 minutes. And these were the questions, and it's important to remember, all with follow-up questions. And remember, that goes back to that interrogate, that sense that those inspectors are really trying to probe and get as much information as possible. So these are some really good starting points as a team leader to help you with looking at your curriculum and your vision for next year. So what is your vision? Where do you cover 2 complete Shakespeare texts at Key Stage 3? 2 playwrights, that sense of national curriculum. Where are you making sure that your scheme of learning, that your curriculum maps meet that? What drama do you do? So that idea that you're doing cross-curricular teaching. Have you planned your curriculum and learning to ensure progressions? That idea of planning for progress towards that key stage and the next key stage. Opportunities for music. Now, that looks a bit of a different question from maybe what you'd expect an English teacher, but in this particular setting and context, part of the school improvement plan is that sense of music and being taught cross-curricular and how it can be included in other subjects. So that's the reason for that question. So it's really worthwhile going back to your school improvement plan and looking and thinking, right, where is English meeting that? Or can I answer that question as a team leader about certain points on the school improvement plan that need to be developed? Your subject knowledge your team have, and how do you support the less experienced or non-specialist staff? 2 or 3 year Key Stage 3 and why? And the purpose of Year 11. So that idea again of what is the purpose of Year 11 beyond that exam and beyond that exam practice and progress towards attaining GCSE grades. What skills are we setting up with them that they can then develop and include in later life and higher education? So the head of department took with her to this meeting her laptop. She already had loaded the key documentation that she felt would help her, which was her curriculum vision, her curriculum plan, so her plans across year 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. Her reasoning, her rationale. So on the curriculum plan, where there was a topic, if you hovered on the topic, there was the rationale behind why that particular topic and why that particular point on the curriculum map. There were then links to the schemes of work or schemes of learning for each of those topics, and also the knowledge and understanding of the department's history, current situation and future vision. So what's been happening historically? So where in terms of maybe the strengths of the department have always been, what the current situation is, and then what the future looks like for English in this school. So looking at the documentation, mapping it out. So curriculum maps can be a key indicator to an Ofsted inspector or to anyone else visiting, or what provision is in place in your subject area and how it builds over the key stages. So here's an example of what this looks like. We've got year 9 at the bottom and how that feeds into year 10. So you've got the topic, assessment, key knowledge. Year 10 as well have got links to previous learning, so you can see where it was last kind of done as a skill. So that sense of retrieval of these are where it has got prior explicit links to year 9 or to year 10 if you're then looking at the year 11 map. So then from mapping out your curriculum map, linking it to your scheme of learning or schemes of work, and it can show and break down how a unit or topic of work addresses and covers certain areas from the curriculum map. So you can see where there is maybe the key assessment opportunities, where SMSC is explicit within that unit of work, cultural capital and suggestions of how to treat it within that unit of work, and then just week by week suggestions of activities, the keywords and key vocabulary to introduce to learners in that week. Again, thinking about that use of tier 3 vocabulary, that idea of it being ambitious. So for example, with year 10, this idea of characters as a vehicle, protagonist, antagonist, repugnant, unsavoury. So starting to really think about up-levelling those vocabulary choices by the learners. Can see as well the fact that there's some suggested homeworks of how they can then be enriched outside the curriculum and outside of the classroom in terms of their learning, and also how to support and stretch your more able pupils, and also how to support your less able pupils within that particular topic or unit of work. So when we're looking at that intent level as curriculum and team leaders, here are my top tips. 1, discuss what you can evidence. Don't include poetic phrases in a vision that have no substance. What Ofsted and any external visitors are looking for is a very clear vision that then everything else is underpins. So this idea that then that's seamlessly embedded into the curriculum plans, that is then evident in schemes of work, evident in the teaching and learning across the department in those learning walks or learning visits. Number 2, buy-in with the team. A team which all contribute to the curriculum provision is a stronger and more invested team. And when they are then obviously being observed or asked questions by Ofsted, they've got a clearer understanding of what is happening rather than just being someone following it. They've actually been a collaborator with it. Know your gaps. Consider the value and intention of each area of the curriculum and how it allows for retrieval of key knowledge and skills. So being honest, where are your gaps? What are the areas that as currently as a team you are improving upon? And we'll come to that in a moment with implementation. So with implementation, possible questions that an inspector or outside visitor might ask your team are the following. Or you as a team leader, does your team follow the curriculum? How would you know this? So as a team leader, do you do learning walks or learning visits to your staff quite regularly so you know what's happening in certain classes and lessons? What are the team strengths? What areas need development? How do you utilise your CPD time as a department? And 3 reflective questions are your current strengths as a team, which areas you need to address, and how can you implement these and what the changes will lead to. So a really good exercise you can do as a team as part of your department time is, with that framework, think about what are your 3 areas of strength and maybe 2 or 3 areas to develop and implement. So for example, it could be using mock plans to plan your curriculum, addressing the needs of that particular cohort. Your enrichment sessions, so for example, it could be your outside speakers have a SEND background themselves and are then used as an inspiration or aspiration for your SEND pupils. Overlapping your literature and language skills in one unit, so recalling and retrieving key skills such as language method analysis as much as possible throughout the year or key stage. Areas you might develop a little bit more is this idea of cultural capital links. What explicit links can you make from your units of work to the world around them so it's becoming part of their lifelong ability as a learner? Use exam board analysis of questions to create and review the skills taught to year 11 so you know where in the curriculum they're best placed. And to maybe create in your team time a subject specialism rota so you can learn from each other and your good practice in the team. It doesn't have to be the whole team meeting, 20 minutes maybe at the beginning or the end, where a teacher then shares what they have been doing and then also evaluating how it can then be developed further or implemented in other key stages or in other classes. So what did implementation look like in reality at Chiltern High School for boys, our case study it seems for this session? So what was scheduled were 4 year 8 lessons and 1 being a SEND class in particular, and then 2 higher ability year 11. What was actually seen? So 2 of the 4 year 8, and then the third one wasn't seen due to the fact that they were kind of walking past, saw the library and saw a year 8 class doing reading in the library and wanted to see them, and then saw them again in period 2 as a third year 8 class. And then the higher ability year 11 times 2. So what you can see very clearly is that they're looking across the 2 key stages, also ability groups as well. So they're looking at key stage 3 and how that builds and develops into then year 11. So questions that this department were asked, they went in as a team, so they could speak and discuss as a group. It wasn't as individual discussion. The team leader was allowed in to observe these discussions and the feedback given in this time at this point. So any gaps, structure that helps support the learning in Key Stage 4, and how do you get there? Gaps in English in terms of their attainment and progress, and what are you doing about it? How do you ensure that pupils are able to tackle Dickens and Shakespeare? And how do you then link that into earlier on maybe parts of your curriculum? What is done to enhance subject knowledge, and what CPD is in place to support that? Whole school CPD. And then the last few questions seem to link to this well-being focus now that's in the Ofsted framework about workload being manageable, designated safeguarding leads, and that sense of if you felt bullied or working as a supportive department. So my top tips for the implementation part: invest in your weakest link. And I don't mean weakest link as an individual teacher, weakest link in terms of your skill or your area that needs to develop. A strong team is essential, so invest and support all. So it's really good to identify what your gaps are as a team and then work together collaboratively to address and strengthen. Research retrieval strategies. So this could be through thinking hard, this could be a starter at the beginning, so it could be a key quote from Macbeth about leadership, and you're looking at non-fiction writing and your task is about leadership, and you do a quick retrieval on Macbeth, what are his views on leadership and what a leader should look like, and then link it into the students performing their own opinion about leadership. It could be the fact that you wanted to look at a particular theme. So it could be that you're about to move on to a new text and the key theme is isolation in year 9. Just put the word isolation on the board as a starter. What do students think isolation actually means to them? What other texts have they looked at in year 8 or year 7 that have dealt with isolation? And what were the moments of isolation in those texts? And you could give maybe a point system towards that for a sense of competition. So for example, if they remember a text in year 8, they get less points than if they remember a text in year 7 because they're having to remember back a bit further. And stock phrases, implementing stock phrases and keywords across the department. So stock phrases could be evaluative verbs that you want students to use in Key Stage 3 and year 7, 8, going into year 9. Evaluative verbs then into Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 to show that they're evaluating their opinion or what they have read. And also coat hanger statements, those statements to really focus on the question, address it in the first sentence or 2 sentences they're writing in this discursive essay, and then being able to then link back to their coat hanger statement throughout to ensure that they're addressing and answering the question. So now let's look at the impact section. So these are the types of questions that potentially an outside visitor could ask pupils about their progress. It's important as well that students will be asked questions. They're allowed to have their books and their work and materials in front of them to be able to help them to answer these questions, and they can really then help to answer maybe any questions that visitor might have about the work that they're seeing in certain books or the way it's been laid out in a particular way. It really does help open up that dialogue. So a good practice could be as a teacher or as a team leader that you are then going and questioning pupils about their work with their books. So pupils are then encouraged to be able to pinpoint or look at particular examples to be able to help explain their ideas or their meaning further. So what do you remember about today's lesson? How does that fit with your last lesson and the next lesson? What do your teachers do to ensure you remember what you were taught 6 months ago? Do your teachers explain how the work fits in with the big picture, whether that's in the starter or when you're introducing the learning objective, or whether that's maybe at the end as a plenary, that the students have to almost summarise what they learnt that lesson, how they think it's going to link into next lesson, or how it fits into their bigger picture of the text or the course as a whole. How has your subject terminology developed? So maybe what words have you developed and improved upon since Key Stage 3? So this idea that maybe in Key Stage 3 it's personification, onomatopoeia, and more literary devices, and then going into Key Stage 4 they're learning much more maybe about extended metaphors or symbolism or motifs. Tell us something your teachers told you that has been helpful. And they will talk to 2 year groups or key stages at once. So this idea that, like when they observed for Chiltern High School for boys year 8 and year 11, they'll have some year 8s in the same panel as year 11s. So they can really see that the year 11s can maybe build or develop on what the year 8s were saying is maybe their entry point of their learning at the lower key stage. So in reality, the schedule was that the inspector identified the pupils he wanted to speak to from the data and seating plans provided. Pupils took their books with them to the student panel and they were spoken to in groups. The first question was a bit leading to catch them out, but in the event of a fight, how would your teacher deal with it? So just reassuring that there's a consistency across the school in terms of the behaviour policy. What are you learning in English? How are your teachers supporting you? Do you enjoy English lessons? What can you tell me about what you learnt in the topic that maybe they saw in the lesson? And the last two safeguarding questions. Do teachers explain how to be safe? Do you feel safe in school? So top tips for impact. Pupil perspective. Spend some time as a team reflecting, or as a classroom practitioner, on how are pupils maybe feeling or thinking in your class space. Can they access the knowledge at each key stage? Are you making explicitly clear where the learning has built from and where it's going to? A pupil-led curriculum. Speak to pupils regularly to ensure curriculum and the provision in place supports them the most. So if there's a particular way that you mark and assess their work that really seem to engage them, the fact that then you're using that maybe more regularly and sharing that as good practice with your team. The fact that if you feel that maybe they're struggling with the text, what ideas or strategies do they think that would help them access it further? And intervene the interventions. Evaluate the interventions. Are the right pupils accessing and improving with the most fitting support strategies for them? The fact that maybe isolating them isn't necessarily an effective intervention. It could be, for example, that the teaching assistant, if you have allocated to one, goes and works with maybe more able pupils, so they're getting an understanding and helping their subject knowledge, and that frees you up to then work with that student who has got that educational healthcare plan that might really be struggling and needs that teacher specialist support in the lesson, and just to have that one-to-one time in the room. So thank you very much for today's session and joining me. I hope that that's really given you some points and obviously some real life examples of what could be experienced in a deep dive in English. As I said at the beginning, this has not been to really specifically tell you what to do, as we're all from different settings and obviously have very different pupils that we need to develop and tailor our curriculum towards. But three really useful links that I want to leave you with today is from the Ofsted framework itself. The first one that's just come up is an overview of the research that the inspection framework was based upon. So this idea that when they were actually introducing the new framework, it's underpinned by research pedagogy. The second one that I got a lot from is inspecting the curriculum, which really gives a good overview of what Ofsted are looking for in that deep dive and when looking at the curriculum. And lastly, the education inspection framework. So the Ofsted documentation themselves in terms of when they come in to see that difference between the different ratings within intent, implementation and impact. So thank you very much for listening and watching, and I hope that this has been really useful as a starting point to get you thinking about next year and how you can use this time to maybe really review and look at your curriculum and how it could maybe be developed in certain areas, but also celebrating the strengths and successes that you already have. Also, at the top of each of the slides has been the @Chiltern TSA, where you can go and obviously upload anything that you feel would be relevant to this discussion or any questions that you have.
Thank you, Nikki. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. A lot of questions have been coming through. Nikki Goodman is second in charge in English at Cedars Upper School in Leighton Buzzard. And she's been doing a lot of work around how the new framework fits into English as a subject. And she's also a specialist leader in education in English as well, and works across the trust, which is Chiltern Learning Trust. On the Q&A in terms of answering by text, we've also got Nicola Hickton, who's the Director of Standards for English across the trust as well. And she'll also, both of them will be joining on Twitter as well. They might be multitasking now and actually doing both at the same time, I'm not sure. But we're going to hop straight into the live Q&A. Do you want to say hi, Nikki?
Hi everybody, it's nice to see so many people joining this morning. Obviously a very different way of delivering CPD and receiving it, but I hope it's been useful and just given some food for thought to kind of think about next year and mapping out curriculum, etc. Obviously, I've been keeping up with the questions that lots of you have asked, and I've kind of looked at kind of what kind of seems to be some main threads. And I think number one, the first thing that kind of came up was a lot of people wanting reassurance about the different settings, I think. So we had someone ask a question who's working currently in a pupil referral unit, and then someone was also asking that's basically working with in a specialist school for SEND pupils. And I think it's really useful to remember that Ofsted will consider the setting and the context of your students and who your intake is, and think about what progress you intend to make with those pupils, whether it's in a shorter term. Someone commented that they only have their pupils for 16 weeks before then they're reintegrated back into a mainstream school. And so I think what you need to kind of consider is being very transparent with Ofsted of these are the pupils that we get in, and this is their journey with us in the time that we have them. And it's that, like I said at the beginning of my talk, triangulation. It's what impact are they then having that then you're reviewing and reflecting into your curriculum and then implementing. But it's got to be about the pupils that you have. Personally, for me, I'm in central Bedfordshire, so we have a 3-tier system currently. So I teach year 9 upwards. So I don't have year 7 or 8 on the curriculum. So once again, it's being mindful that that's the setting that I'm currently in. So what am I putting in place for those pupils? So I really do think that, you know, be transparent with these are the pupils that we have, and this is how we are tailoring our curriculum to meet their needs, but also making sure that that curriculum is ambitious for them.
Thank you, Nikki. Just one of the other things, I know you mentioned PRUs and special educational schools, but there's a lot coming up to do with referencing primary versus secondary, the advice that you were talking about. Does it differ? And if it does, how would that differ?
Yes, I saw as well that there was a lot of primary, and Nicola's been really good at, I think, kind of answering quite promptly some of those primary questions that were coming up. I think it's really important that we are thinking about key stages. So when I've referenced key stage 3 or key stage 4, do replace that with your key stage. So for example, if you're a year 5 teacher who's in key stage 2, it's looking at early years and looking at that curriculum and looking at what kind of are they saying they should be attaining at that point before coming to you. And again, it's that idea of what are their gaps. So it's either liaising with that teacher at that key stage, or doing a baseline, so you can really see what are the gaps of that pupil and adapting your curriculum. So it's not about changing your topics every single year that you teach. And obviously at primary as well, English is part of a wider cross curricular. You're going to embed literacy skills when you're teaching a history project, or when you're doing potentially a project on space. And I saw that someone said about the fact that they had put literacy across their schemes of learning across the curriculum, which is great to see. So I think, again, it's just the idea of what are the gaps of those particular pupils, and how are you making sure that you're adapting your curriculum for them, not changing the topics, but just thinking, okay, if it is the fact that, for example, they should kind of their vocabulary list, for example, and how they spell, it's then addressing, okay, not straight away in the first 2 weeks, but just over that time embedding, right, do they need to recap and retrieve the killing and spelling of keywords, etc. So I think what I'm kind of saying, although yes, the key stage 3 example and key stage 4 was quite apparent on the video, and obviously the case study I used was the secondary school of the reality, I do think that primary school teachers should also expect those kind of questions and that sense of interrogation of how are you meeting the needs and provision at your key stage.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Nikki. Just while I'm going to have a look at some more questions, if you can have a look through the list, anything else. I just want to just reference in terms of online on Twitter, Adrian's just messaged me to say that absolutely delighted Chartered College has now included all these sessions within their promotional literature to do with online learning that's going on while the lockdown's in place, and that's in line with Research Ed, and I think there's Teacher Development Trust, etc. So these sessions are all live on there. If you go to the Chiltern Learning Trust Twitter feed and the Chiltern TSA, the conversation is alive at the moment on there, so do go on there and tweet. If you've got any questions that you want answered from a wider audience, go on Twitter now If you are on there, follow Chiltern TSA and use the hashtag LDeduchat, and those questions will be picked up. I'm looking through them on my phone as we go along as well. So, and like Nikki said during the presentation, if you've got anything that you want to upload, anything you want to share, go on there. And as always, wherever you are, tell us where you're from and how you found this, how you're finding this session and the other sessions as well. So just to touch on what you said, Nikki, there, I mean, I've like yourself, you've probably seen reports, and you've also seen witnessed Ofsted inspections to do with deep dives to primary and secondary. So that just for those people that are looking at different settings, I would say a big chunk, 80 to 90%, is process in terms of what they're following as how they treat a deep dive within your school, whether you're primary, whether you're a PRU, whether you're an independent, whether you are secondary, or so from that point of view, the process will be the same. The context is what you will add with reference to your school. And that might be a key stage difference. It might be a learning difference. It might be a demographic difference. They will look at the context. Your job would be to actually promote and show that in its best possible light in terms of what you are expected to do, and especially to do with the national curriculum, making sure that you're following the guidance there, make sure that it's got markers all the way through, and the process will be the same. And that's from everything that I've seen. I think Simon also referred to that last week as well. He didn't actually refer to settings at all in that way, because the process is the same in terms of how they deal with the deep dives. Any other questions that have come up, Nikki?
Yes, there's been two questions that I've just kind of scanned down and seen. The first one was about maybe now, in particular with the older years and the older key stages, they've actually used the word monotonous, but basically about, I think, with the new GCSE framework coming in, which has now trickled into Key Stage 3 and into Key Stage 2, with the idea of context of certain writers, is how they're very much now white British white writers we've now got on the curriculums. There's been almost a very big shift away from maybe writers from other cultures and traditions, and which is a shame. And someone just said, how do you still embed it? How do you still interweave it? And that can be part of cultural wider reading. That can be part of the fact that you're trying to then embed those writers maybe into other subjects or other curriculums, because reading is across the curriculum. Even this week, I was looking at Alex Quigley, the Confident Teacher, and how he's got a new book out about closing the reading gap. And on my Twitter, I've just put about the fact that how he's putting reading strategies in, not just for English, but across whole school. And I think it's really important that maybe we are using whole school to maybe address those writers or those particular topics that we don't now necessarily have time to fit on that curriculum. But as I stressed as well, we're not just training them towards exams. We're not training them just towards those SATs. We're not just training them towards those GCSEs or A levels. We need to make sure that they are leaving us with an enriched curriculum, with a skill set, with a skill base. So what I think is really important is that if you are doing Dickens, the ideas that have come up in that text or that novel, can another a modern British poet kind of complement that with this idea of them untapping the wider ideas or understanding of that particular moment in that novel. So starting to kind of thread in other writers, other different pieces of literature as you're teaching the main curriculum. And obviously, again, at primary, at Key Stage 2, that sense of thematic topics, so that you're covering a wide breadth or depth across the curriculum with maybe more topical or thematic points as well at that point.
Just while you look for another question, I just want to just drive home on the what's happening over on Twitter at the moment. There's a lot of discussions to do with in terms of this CPD being valuable for all people, all staff. Now, as I said, this will be available as a recording after the session on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. There's conversations about making sure that your trainees that at this stage are in a limbo phase in terms of the ones that have just qualified or are in the process of being qualified. They're going to be going into school settings that might be having inspections when they start, whatever format they take. So make sure that you share the links to do with sessions like these to all your trainees as well. And for those schools out there that are looking to employ, and you have the contact details of people that are starting with you, make sure that you send the links over to them as well, so that they can actually get the same knowledge base that you want them to have when they enter the school. So from that point of view, make sure you do share these sessions with your staff, especially we've got a whole series. So there'll be things that are specific to do with English today, then there'll be maths, we've got science coming up, we've got pre-recorded ones that Nadine Cotton did on how to prepare for deep dives in various leadership positions. And then we had Simon Webb earlier on, who discussed the new framework in general. Picked up on anything else, Nikki?
Yes, I've got two other questions that kind of seem to have come up. So the first one was a really good question about people with additional responsibility in English. So is it just the team leader that meets the Ofsted inspector, or would those with responsibility also be part of that meeting? And I think that's a really good question. I think in particular for English departments, sometimes we're one of the bigger departments, like maths and science, we're a core subject. So, you know, we do kind of have sometimes those bigger teams. So it will be for that first meeting in the morning, when looking at the intent of the curriculum, it will be with the team leader or head of department, will be the person in charge of curriculum and overseeing the curriculum and quality assuring that curriculum in English in your school setting. So again, at primary level, if they're doing a deep dive of English across the primary curriculum and want to see what English looks like at Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, and also, for example, in the central Bedfordshire, where there's that 3-tier, Key Stage 3, because Year 7 and 8 would still be in a middle school. So they're looking across those key stages. They'd want to see the person in charge of English across the curriculum and how they map and plan that out. Those with responsibility, so a second in English or Key Stage 3 or Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5 coordinator, or however your role in your TLR is in that team, you'd be part of the team meeting later on in the day. So it would be that team leader at the beginning to say, what, as I said in those reflective questions, what's your curriculum, what does it look like? But those with responsibility would be part of the meeting later, where then they would be saying, this is how we implement that curriculum, even with our classes, or that's how it comes and fits under our role and responsibility in the team, how we're then part of the developing of the curriculum. And like I said before, although the team leader is overseeing it and quality assuring it, they should not solely be writing it. It should be a collaborative process with the team, because if the team then understand the intent and the vision, and then there will obviously be there'll be more clarity of how they implement that into their daily practice, then you'll have the impact on the pupils, that there is that sense of consistency across the department. So hopefully that's answered that question about those with responsibility in terms of how they fit into the Ofsted process. And you are instrumental, you know, you're being a big support to that team leader on the day to ensure that you're implementing and part of that quality assurance process, not just on that Ofsted day, but actually going up to that Ofsted day, how you're part of the learning walks, for example, process in your department as well. So that support to the team leader will be invaluable in that time. And the second question that came up was more subject specific about national curriculum and the text. And obviously I think there was a query about the question that the Ofsted inspector asked the head of department. In reality, they obviously asked about the Shakespeare play, which plays do you cover? And then they asked about which other two playwrights do you cover across the key stage? And I think they were asking that. And if you looked further down, there was another question about drama. And I think those questions were very much trying to tailor to the head of department that links into the school improvement plan. I think the school that when they came in before Ofsted were thinking, how do they bring drama and Orison student voice into their whole school policy? And I think when they were asking that head of department with that music question, they were very much looking at how does that team leader take into account certain areas on the school improvement plan holistically and then embed it into their curriculum specifically. So I think there were some questions where they're kind of just saying, and the third and the last question when they actually asked in reality about do you follow a 3-year or a 2-year Key Stage 4 and GCSE, there's that rationale. So that head of department said, we start it at this particular point in our curriculum, and this is the reason why we do it, and this is then how we stage that out and implement it, and this is the impact on the pupils that we see. So there is that sense that as long as you have got your rationale and your reasoning behind your choices on your curriculum and showing that it is for those pupils, again, whether that's in that pupil referral unit or that SEND setting, or and as Arv was saying about the different contexts, as long as you are showing why you are making the choices that you are doing, and then it's having that impact on those pupils, that's what they want to see with those interrogations, and then they just want to make sure they see it in action. And I know I'm trying to make it sound possibly quite easy, and obviously we all know the stresses of having external people come in and inspect us, because, you know, we're teachers, we're very, you know, at the moment, I know I'm very much missing my pupils and not being in my classroom. It's a very much vocational job. But hopefully the video's just given clarity on the type of questions that you should be asking yourselves when doing a curriculum as well, not just, let's just teach this text because we have to. It's that, well, what is it about this text that's going to benefit the pupils that we have? What's going to be the impact on them, not just in English, but in their wider life, that cultural capital as well. And I think if we're starting to approach and question and reflect on our curriculum from that point of view, then the Ofsted process will become much more clear in terms of the fact that you know then how to answer those questions because it's part of your daily practice.
Thank you, Nikki. I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of we are missing being in school, interacting with our students, and we are missing that, and we are also missing the interaction between the department, the staff in the departments as well. And if anything's come through with the sessions that we've had so far to do with Ofsted and inspections, and just to do with how we are actually teaching, understanding the why behind what we're teaching is so important, and that everybody understands what we're doing and why we're doing it. I think that's got to be the first question that you've got to ask as a department, and that's got to be a department, as you've quite rightly said, together. You've got to understand why you're teaching what you're teaching, and they're the discussions that the deep dive meetings will have. Is that why are you teaching this? How does this fit in? And how are you moving? How is this going to move your students forward? And how are you showing that they're moving forward? And that comes back to the memory that you said in your presentation. The more progress is now, progress word isn't used, it's how much do they remember of what they've been taught.
Yeah,
And then
remember, know more and do more, and I really think that's the process.
Absolutely.
And someone has just actually made a very good statement about do Ofsted expect everyone to be singing from the same hymn sheet? Do they value department that debate, critique, have unresolved questions? And absolutely, it's being honest. It's not trying to gloss over and say, come in, and then they say, what are your gaps, or what are your pupils' gaps? Nothing. They want to know what you feel your gaps are, and then what are you doing about those gaps? What are you starting to build into the curriculum to fill those gaps? And then the benefit and impact on the pupils. So because what they can see their teachers doing, what's the impact then on pupils and their learning? So I think that idea that the hymn sheet, as someone's just phrased it as, is that idea they're looking for triangulation. There's that intent, implementation, impact. There is that going to be that speak to the team leader, and then go in and see if what the team leader is actually happening in action when they go and look at that range of classes. And when the questions about primary started coming through, it was just before the slide when I said these are the lessons they actually went and visited. They went to year 8 and year 11 across 2 different key stages. So at primary, expect the same in any subject, maths, science, English, but in particular English. What are they doing maybe in year 2? And then what are they doing in year 5 or year 6? And seeing that actually the curriculum has built, there's a familiarity, but how they're developing and progressing those skills across those 2 key stages is something they are really looking for. So that's the bit of the hymn sheet I'd say is what they're looking for, but how you are implementing that, the fact that if you are a department that say we like to critique, we like to review, we like to evaluate, absolutely. If that's part of your vision and how you work as a team, absolutely, that's what should be evident and seen. And someone under that has just said about advice given to very small schools who just have maybe one teacher and then leads the subject. So we're obviously looking at maybe that could happen obviously in independent settings, or again in these specialist school settings. Before I worked in the upper school that I do, I worked in a special educational needs school, so I really do understand that small department being a team of 2 or a team of 1 from that background. And obviously, once again, I think what probably you're going to struggle with the most, the person that asked that question, the people that work in that pupil referral unit, etc., is the fact that maybe you feel that one-person team. And what I would say, and I messaged and responded to someone who had a similar question, is that although yes, maybe in the physical setting you might feel a team of 1, there is now so much, and I think these CPDs are great to show that through Zoom, through Twitter, etc., you can connect with other people from other settings. So do look at kind of other schools in your area that you can connect to. They could be either a mainstream setting, or it could be a school that you want to connect with that kind of has pupils of a similar setting, similar context to you, and share resources. You know, pass them over your curriculum map for that objective view and say, this is my rationale because these are the pupils that we get. What do you think? To have that person say, I really like what you're doing there, but how does that maybe then link into other places? I think I definitely feel that I need those professional discussions with colleagues. And sometimes I think, you know, if you go on a day's course, that you get so much from those, but then it's one day. It's, as Will Smith said, it's not incremental little small measures over time. And I know it sometimes can be hard to fit into day to day, but the people that are kind of saying they're from those maybe one person or small teams, I definitely say, even if you're not part of a trust or part of a group or chain of schools as such, which I know some people are, but if your setting is still very much, you feel a little bit distant, do get in touch with people online. Do follow obviously Chiltern Learning Trust. We've got a range of schools from different settings, different contexts, different key stages, who'd be happy, you know, that are happy that if you get in touch with, you know, there to share. I think we are now in an age where we are all going to be in the same boat with Ofsted. It's a new framework for everyone. We're still trying to work out and negate the process, especially in the English department. So do share, do put out there what you're kind of looking for, and people will be there to say, I've done this, or I tried this and this was really good. So I do think those people that have kind of come with that kind of almost quite nervous point of view about Ofsted because of the context that they are in, do speak up and say, you know, I want to collaborate, I want to share. And I think moving forward, as I've said, from the current situation, I think that more maybe CPDs virtually like this will be something hopefully of the future. So rather than having to go and sit for a whole day on one thing, it can be over time, but through digitally through Zoom, I think could be a really powerful way of people collaboratively working together, even from smaller settings.
Thank you, Nikki. I can't say how much I appreciate how much effort you've put into this and how much depth you've given to the questions that have been asked and the answers that you've given. So thank you so much. All I want to do is make sure that you now can log off and you can actually enjoy your bank holiday and your weekend. So thank you very much for your time, Nikki, and also Nicola Hickton as well, who's been behind the scenes answering questions. Really appreciated from the two schools at Cedars Upper in Leighton Buzzard and also Puttridge High. Thank you so much. I'm just now going to wrap up for you, as we've now just gone over the 10 o'clock mark, and I really want you to enjoy your bank holiday. 5 sessions next week. We've got Sarah Chick, who is with Nazam Latif, who will be looking at deep dives, continuing this discussion, and this time with reference to science. And then we've got the wonderful Mary Myatt, who's discussing and chatting with her yesterday. She's back on track. And she's got some new material to share with you. And then we've got Razna Chowdhury, who's Director of Maths within the Trust, who's looking at creating a whole school maths culture. And then we've got Dr. Emma Kell, who'll be looking at well-being for teachers working from home, so very poignant at this time. And then we've got Marcus Ray, who's also one of our directors for primary, who'll be looking at deep dives, and this is preparing for deep dives in maths, and it will be across all settings. I'll make sure that happens so that you're not you don't feel that you've been left out. This conversation is continuing. It's continuing on Twitter at the moment. Make sure you follow at Chiltern TSA. Use the hashtag LDeduchat. Make sure that you go onto our YouTube channel, catch all the recordings. And that's at the Chiltern Teaching School Alliance. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you watch anything that you have missed, or re-watch anything resources. We'll see what we can make available for you after this. All I want to do is to say to you, we really do appreciate how much time and effort you put in to make sure that you attend these sessions early in the morning. And as I said, we've had 3 to 4 a week. Next week we've got 5. Please do join us, but please look after yourselves as well. Today is a bank holiday. Make sure you do get some time to yourself and enjoy this weekend. Finally, I just want to say, stay safe, stay at home, and enjoy the time that you have with your family and friends that you have. This is me, Arv Kaushal. I'm signing off now, and I'll be going to enjoy the bank holiday VE Day, and see you next week.